In 2023, I, Ryan Carter, then 28 years old, was working the night shift as a front desk clerk at the Sunset Inn, a small establishment on the outskirts of Fairview, right off the main highway leading into the nearby metropolitan area. Fairview was a quiet little town of about 10,000 souls. Most of its residents employed in farming or service work, and places like the Sunset Inn mostly catered to travelers passing through or salesmen looking for a stopover. The hotel had only 3 floors, with a total of 35 rooms, and on weeknights, usually only 10 to 15 were occupied. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., a schedule I had chosen because it fit my private lifestyle and kept me away from the daytime bustle. My duties consisted mostly of handling paperwork, monitoring online reservations, and keeping an eye on the security cameras positioned in the lobby, the hallways, and the parking lot. The front desk itself was simple. A long wooden counter, a few old leather sofas in the corner, a flat-screen TV on the wall usually left off to save power, and a small vending area for soft drinks and snacks. Behind the counter was a smaller back room where I could sit with my laptop on a comfortable chair and still watch the lobby through a little interior window. After 10 p.m., the front doors locked automatically. Guests had to ring the bell so I could buzz them in remotely. Most nights passed uneventfully, with only the occasional late arrival or a request for extra towels. But on one cold Tuesday night in November, things began to shift, subtly yet disturbingly. Around 11:30 p.m., the doorbell rang, pulling me out of scrolling through news articles on my phone. Through the glass, I saw a man standing outside, about 40, roughly 6'1", lean but solid. He wore a gray track jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over half his face, and carried a large black duffel bag. When I opened the door, the cold air gusted in, carrying the damp smell of a light rain that had just ended. He stepped into the lobby with deliberate strides, introduced himself as Mark Thompson, and asked for a room for the night. His voice was deep and even, showing no sign of fatigue despite the late hour. I checked the system and confirmed a vacancy, quoted him the nightly rate, $85 for a standard room. He nodded without question, drew out a Visa card, and handed it to me. The reader beeped its approval. I printed the receipt and gave him the electronic key to room 312 on the 3rd floor. During the exchange, I noticed his gaze linger on me longer than necessary. About 5 seconds after taking the key, he stared directly at my face without speaking. His expression was blank, his deep brown eyes framed by a faint scar on his left cheek, nothing overtly alarming, but enough to register. He turned away, walked to the elevator. I heard the doors open and close. I went back to my work, assuming he was just another guest, perhaps a truck driver on a long haul. But about an hour later, when I looked up from my screen, I saw him back in the lobby. He didn't approach the counter to ask for anything. He simply walked past and sat on one of the lounge sofas. The TV was off, yet he stared at the dark screen, his hands resting on his knees, holding nothing. I assumed he couldn't sleep. Some guests were like that, especially if dealing with personal issues or just unused to a strange bed. I thought little of it and returned to my tasks. But after about 30 minutes, I realized he hadn't moved at all. He sat in exactly the same position, not nodding off, not pulling out a phone, just staring straight ahead as though waiting for something invisible. An unease began to creep in as I got up to fetch a can of soda from the vending machine. Crossing the lobby, I could feel his eyes tracking me, following every step. I didn't dare look straight at him. But from the corner of my eye, I saw his head tilt slightly, and the sensation of being watched made the skin at my scalp prickle. When I returned to the counter, that stare still clung to me until I sat down again. Around 1 a.m., I decided to double-check the reservation system just to make sure everything was in order. And that was when I noticed the first oddity. Room 312 showed vacant on the screen, even though I had just checked him in not long before. I muttered under my breath, went back through the transaction log, but found no record of Mark Thompson at all. No name, no credit card number, no payment. The system didn't even show the confirmation beep I remembered so clearly hearing. Confused, I checked the door key log, the system that records every time a guest unlocks their room, and saw there had been no activity for 312 since the previous shift. This meant he had never gone up to the room after taking the key. My heart began to pound faster. I looked through the glass panel at the lounge. He was still there, staring at the dark TV screen. A sick realization rose in me. If he wasn't a legitimate guest, then what was he doing here? I dialed room 312 from the desk. The phone rang 15 times, no answer. I decided to wait 15 minutes, my eyes glued to him on the camera feed, but he didn't move. At about 1:45 a.m., he stood, slowly walked toward the hallway near the restrooms, and stopped at a dark corner, half his body swallowed by shadow. He stood there motionless, like a statue. I pretended to work at the computer, but kept glancing up. After a few minutes, he returned to the lounge and sat again. I phoned my manager, Linda, even though I knew she was asleep. Drowsily, she told me it was probably a system glitch and advised me to watch closely and call the police if he showed threatening behavior. I thought to myself that his presence alone was already threatening. Watching the cameras, I saw him moving with strange agility now. Sometimes near the vending machines, sometimes by the elevator, sometimes in a dim corner the light didn't reach. Each time I looked up, he was in a different spot, always staring toward the desk. By 3 a.m., I couldn't stand it anymore. I called the non-emergency police line, explained there was a man wandering the hotel who wasn't a guest. They said they'd send someone to check. While I waited, he drew closer to the counter, stopping about 10 feet from me, just staring without a word. He hardly blinked, and the silence made it hard to breathe. At about 3:30, the doorbell rang, another guest arriving late. I opened the door and saw him turn his head, tracking the guest's path across the lobby with eyes like a predator studying prey. A few minutes later, he vanished from the lobby. On the monitor, I saw him on the second floor, standing before a guest's door with his hand lightly on the knob, as though listening. That was when I called 911 directly, reporting that he was outside a guest's room and might be trying to break in. Dispatch assured me officers were on the way. I kept my eyes on the screen. He stayed there about 4 minutes, then slowly turned, came back down to the lobby, walked straight to the desk, leaned on it, and asked, "Got any late-night food?" His voice was so deep it sent a shiver down my spine. I pointed toward the vending machines, my hand trembling. He gave a slight chuckle and went back to the lounge. My name is Emily Nguyen, 26 years old. In 2024, I began working the night shift at a small gas station along Route 17 on the outskirts of Fairview. The area was fairly desolate, with most late-night traffic made up of cargo trucks and the occasional local driver, so customers were scarce during my hours. The station, called Quick Fuel, consisted of little more than a cashier counter, a few pumps outside, a small snack and drink section, and a handwritten bulletin board behind the counter where daily specials were posted. I worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., a schedule that fit well with my online classes during the day. And I preferred the quiet compared to the hectic rhythm of the town center. Most of my duties involved ringing up purchases, restocking shelves, and mopping the floors during the slower stretches. Inside, the place was lit by cold fluorescent bulbs that gave off a faint, constant buzz, and the air always carried a trace of gasoline drifting in from outside. Behind the counter was a small back room with a mini fridge and a chair where I could rest when there were no customers. After midnight, the main door locked automatically, requiring visitors to ring the buzzer. But most nights, I just sat alone, scrolling through my phone or listening to podcasts to pass the time. I didn't wear a name tag. Management thought it unnecessary for a place this small. But I often hand-wrote the notices on the board, which regulars sometimes commented on. Everything began on a damp Thursday night, around 1:15 a.m., when the buzzer sounded. I looked up from my phone and saw a man walk in. He looked to be about 45, average build, wearing a faded dark blue denim jacket. His hair was wild and unkempt, as though it hadn't been brushed in days, and his lips were dry and cracked. Unlike most customers, he didn't head toward the coffee or the candy shelves. Instead, he stopped near the counter, fixing me with a strange smile, like we already knew each other. "Hi," I said, keeping my tone polite, the way the store required. He answered immediately, "Emily, how long have you been working this shift alone?" I froze. I had never seen him before, and as I mentioned, I wasn't wearing a name tag. His gaze locked onto my face, waiting for a reaction. Forcing myself to stay calm, I asked, "What can I get you?" He introduced himself as Jack, then pointed to the bulletin board behind me, the one with the handwritten note about the new coffee deal. He remarked, "Your handwriting is very sharp. The way you make your E's so distinctive, very precise." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt wrong, too specific, too personal, far beyond what any stranger should notice. I muttered a thank you and asked again if he needed anything. But he simply stood there for another minute, glancing around the store as if committing every detail to memory. Then he nodded and left without buying a thing. The door shut behind him, leaving me with a vague, unsettled chill. I told myself he was probably just a curious local. But that night, I found myself checking the back door more often. And when my shift finally ended, I drove home with my car key clenched tight between my fingers, ready, if I needed it, to defend myself. Jack began appearing sporadically after that. Not every night, not often enough for me to call him a stalker right away, but just enough that I knew it wasn't coincidence. Sometimes he'd buy a bottle of water, but mostly he lingered near the counter and tried to talk. Once, around 2 a.m., he walked in with that same familiar smile and said, "You look tired tonight, Emily. Your left eyelid twitches when you're tired, doesn't it?" My stomach nodded. That was a little quirk of mine, something I'd never mentioned to anyone but close friends. He went on, "Do you ever feel lonely working here alone? Route 17 is so empty. No one around for miles." His voice wasn't overtly threatening, just curious, neutral, as if discussing the weather, and that made it even more terrifying. I stepped back and asked, "Do you need anything else?" He tilted his head, looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I've noticed you always check the back door around 2 a.m. Smart. Safety first." Cold shot down my spine. How did he know my routine? He smiled faintly, almost apologetically, then walked out, leaving me standing there with trembling hands. From that night on, my anxiety escalated. I started changing my habits, keeping a metal bar under the counter, locking the bathroom door when home alone, even changing my apartment curtains to avoid being watched. There were nights when Jack didn't come at all, sometimes for a whole week, But that only made it worse. I never knew when he would show up again. I began logging his visits, hoping I'd have evidence if I needed to go to the police. Then one night, around 1:30 a.m., I returned to the counter after a short break and found a selfie lying there. It was a picture of me outside, checking the gas pumps, taken from a very close angle. Far too close for me not to have noticed someone standing there. There was no note, but my name, Emily, was underlined in red ink, and my left eyelid circled. My heart hammered. I knew he'd taken it that very night, because I was wearing the same uniform and the weather matched the light drizzle earlier. The next time Jack came in, a few days later, I decided to confront him. My voice shook, but I was firm. "You need to leave. If you come back, I'll call the police." He stood still, looking at me with an almost sad expression. "I understand, Emily. I just thought you were the kind of person who gets misunderstood. I thought maybe you'd appreciate someone who really notices you." "That's not noticing," I said. "That's stalking. It scares me." He didn't move right away, only continued. "Would it be easier if I bought a soda every night and just talked about the weather? Or if I just commented on your shoes? Always half a size too big, right?" By then, I had dialed 911 under the counter. He saw but didn't interfere, simply nodded and stood with his hands at his sides, as though waiting. Police arrived quickly, within 10 minutes. The station wasn't far from the precinct. They approached Jack, asked for ID. He cooperated without resistance. When they searched his car, a beat-up sedan parked at the edge of the lot, they found a thick notebook filled with dates and details about me. My work schedule, the clothes I wore each night, even the groceries I bought at the nearby market. One page was nothing but my name, Emily, written over and over, at first neatly, then devolving into frantic scrawls. Jack kept repeating to the officers, "I'm just observant. I'm just curious." They arrested him for stalking and harassment, and within a week the court issued a restraining order, barring him from coming within 500 meters of me or the gas station. My manager added extra cameras to the lot, and I was moved to a daytime shift temporarily to recover. Now I no longer work nights. The company transferred me to another branch 2 hours away from Fairview, where I feel safer. But even now, when I drive home and notice a car's headlights following me a little too long, my neck prickles. And sometimes, when I'm handwriting a notice at my new job, I remember how Jack used to say my name, softly, familiarly, as though he'd practiced it hundreds of times in front of a mirror. I wonder if he's really gone, or just waiting somewhere out there in the darkness of Route 17. In 2022, I, Mia Torres, 24 years old, started working weekend night shifts at the Quick Stop gas station on Fairview Road, a back route leading out of the small town of Fairview. It was a fairly isolated stretch, with fields rolling out on either side and only the occasional truck or local car stopping in to refuel or buy snacks. Quick Stop was the archetypal rural gas station. A few pumps outside, a cashier counter inside with shelves of snacks, an automated coffee machine, and a basic security camera system covering the parking lot and the entryway. I chose the Thursday through Saturday 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift to earn extra money while finishing my online accounting courses. At first, I liked the stillness of the night. No noisy crowds, only the wind moving across the fields and the faint buzz of the neon canopy overhead. Inside, the air was always chilly from the constantly running AC, and the smell of gasoline mixed with scorched coffee hung in the background. Behind the counter, there was a small room with a chair and a mini fridge. but I usually stayed out front so I could watch the customers. The online order system for food deliveries was hooked directly to the register, so I could see DoorDash or Uber Eats tickets instantly. But at that hour, orders were rare, and most nights I passed the time mopping floors or taking inventory to stay awake. Everything began on a Saturday night around 2:45 a.m. when my co-worker Ethan, a 25-year-old who worked weekday shifts, stopped by with his friend Dylan. Both looked a little drunk after a late party, wearing goofy smiles and slurred voices. They came in for free coffee, a perk of the job, and to chat. While we made small talk about the weather and the shift, Dylan, a tall, shaggy-haired guy, mentioned a black SUV parked at the far edge of the lot, headlights off but engine running. "There's somebody sitting in it," Dylan said. When I asked, the guy said he's waiting on a DoorDash order. But it's weird because the car was already there before we pulled in. I immediately checked the order system and confirmed there hadn't been a DoorDash pickup in the past 2 hours. Most of the night I'd been in the back tidying shelves, away from the counter and front windows, so I hadn't seen the lot. We shrugged it off at first, figuring maybe the guy had the wrong address. But Dylan added more detail. The SUV looked brand new, no license plates, and the back seat was piled with thick blankets, enough to hide someone underneath. Ethan, though tipsy, was sharper and said, "We were outside smoking and messing around a bit, but the guy just kept watching us, pretending to check his phone." Then Dylan, still riding the buzz from a few beers, decided to walk up to the SUV and ask directly, "What's going on, man? Why do you keep staring at us?" The man inside at first pretended not to understand English, shaking his head and pointing to his phone. But when Dylan pressed, he switched to English, offering the excuse, "I'm at the wrong address, waiting for directions." Then he abruptly shifted into gear and tore out of the lot at high speed. Stranger still, at that exact moment, a second SUV, also black, also unplated, headlights off, rolled into the lot from the opposite direction and fell in behind the first, as if it had been waiting there for the signal. Ethan and Dylan stayed about 30 more minutes, smoking and telling jokes to calm me down. But the whole incident left the air tight and brittle. Ethan warned me, "Mia, be careful. If you see a strange car, call the cops right away." They left around 3:30 a.m., and the rest of my shift passed quietly, but I didn't dare go outside to check the pumps. Instead, I kept my eyes glued to the security cameras. The next night, Saturday, the unease returned, sharper than before. Around 3 a.m., while I was mopping near the counter, a group of 5 men, looked like construction workers coming off a late job, walked in for coffee and snacks. They were talking easily among themselves, but one of them, probably the leader, a bearded man, asked me, "Ma'am, do you know anything about that black SUV idling at the far end of the lot? Lights are off. Looks weird." My stomach dropped. "What car?" I asked. He described it. A brand new black SUV with no license plates. 3 men inside whispering and arguing, one of them pointing straight toward the store. The group told me that while they were fueling at the farthest pump, the SUV had already been there, and they had to walk past it to come inside. They overheard one man speaking, not shouting, but loud enough to be clear, while gesturing toward the counter. "Wait until she's alone." The customers had decided to approach and ask if everything was okay. But as soon as the SUV realized it had been noticed, it slammed into reverse, tires screeching, and sped off into the darkness of Fairview Road. I told them about the night before, the same kind of vehicle, and they looked genuinely concerned. "Are you here alone? We can hang around for a bit to make sure they don't come back," the bearded one offered. I hesitated but agreed. Their presence made me feel safer. They stayed about 25 minutes, sitting around the counter drinking coffee and talking about their jobs to keep the mood light. But the tension remained. Together we checked the cameras and luckily saw no sign of the SUV returning. Before they left, they urged me to call the police if I noticed anything unusual. I thanked them with free coffee. The rest of my shift passed without incident. But when I had to go outside to change the trash at the pumps around 5 a.m., I kept looking over my shoulder, my heart hammering. What frightened me most was that I had never actually seen the vehicle myself, only heard others describe it. At first, I hoped I was just being paranoid, that they were tired drivers lost on their route. But the same type of car, black SUV, no plates, parked where the counter couldn't see, showing up 2 nights in a row at almost the same hour convinced me something was wrong. If Ethan and Dylan hadn't dropped by that first night, or if the group of men hadn't stayed the second, I might have been alone when those men decided to act. I reported the incidents to the station owner, and he installed extra lights at the far end of the lot and advised me to carry pepper spray. Thankfully, I had a few days off after that. And when I returned, the SUV never appeared again. But even now, whenever I hear an engine idling outside with no car pulling up to the pumps, a chill creeps up my spine. I wonder what those men had been planning: kidnapping, robbery, or something worse. And I'm grateful for the strangers who, by chance, became my shield during those terrifying nights on Fairview Road. During the final months of 2021, when the pandemic still haunted everyone with lockdowns and masks, I, Lucas Bennett, found steady work at the Starlight Lodge on the edge of Fairview. I was 31 then, recently laid off from an office job, and the night shift here seemed like the perfect way to avoid crowds. Starlight Lodge was a small, family-run property with only 22 rooms spread over 2 floors, sitting on a quiet side road where most guests were late-night business travelers or truck drivers looking for a place to sleep. Not part of any major chain, the lodge felt homey but worn. Its lobby furnished with a polished wooden reception desk, an automatic coffee machine, a few leather chairs, and a rack of brochures advertising local attractions. My shift ran from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Shorter than at other places, but leaving me daylight hours to hunt for new opportunities. At night, the lodge was usually silent, just a handful of cars in the lot, and the soft wind moving through the nearby trees. Behind the front desk, a short hallway led to a staff break room with a comfy sofa, a mini fridge, a wall-mounted TV, and a small speaker that chimed whenever the desk bell rang. Most of the night I sat back there with my laptop, watching movies or browsing the web, getting up only when I heard the chime or a key card unlock the front door after midnight. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm after a few weeks. The creak of the building as the temperature changed, the ticking of the old heater in the lobby, and the occasional car rolling past on the distant road. These sounds became a familiar backdrop, a kind of white noise that helped me relax in my isolation. But the night shift has a dark side. Ordinary noises can start to play tricks on your imagination. My shift ran from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Shorter than at other places, but leaving me daylight hours to hunt for new opportunities. At night, the lodge was usually silent, just a handful of cars in the lot and the soft wind moving through the nearby trees. Behind the front desk, a short hallway led to a staff break room with a comfy sofa, a mini fridge, a wall-mounted TV, and a small speaker that chimed whenever the desk bell rang. Most of the night I sat back there with my laptop, watching movies or browsing the web, getting up only when I heard the chime or a key card unlock the front door after midnight. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm after a few weeks. The creak of the building as the temperature changed, the ticking of the old heater in the lobby, and the occasional car rolling past on the distant road. These sounds became a familiar backdrop, the kind of white noise that helped me relax in my isolation. But the night shift has a dark side. Ordinary noises can start to play tricks on your imagination. Less than 10 minutes later, just as I sat down again, the bell rang a second time. This time I jumped to my feet, my heart beating a little faster. I moved into the lobby more quickly, but again, no one. The lobby stood empty, the TV blank, the hum of the fridge in the corner suddenly louder than usual. The hairs on my neck prickled, not from cold, but from the sense that something wasn't right. I went to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped into the lot, sweeping my phone's flashlight across the road. No new cars, no footprints on the damp concrete, the cold wind making me shiver. I went back inside and decided to stay at the reception desk instead of retreating to the back. If someone was playing a prank, a drunk guest, maybe a kid, I would catch them. I sat there for about 15 minutes, arms folded, eyes fixed on the small metal push button of the desk bell. Nothing happened. I started to relax, convincing myself it was a technical glitch or the fatigue making me imagine things. Then the bell rang again, sharper this time, as if someone had pressed hard. I snapped my head up so fast my neck twinged, but the lobby was still empty. No one. My skin crawled. I stood, stepped around the counter, and checked behind the chairs to see if anyone was hiding. Nothing. I even opened the public restroom door off the lobby, empty. I stepped outside again, scanning the lot with my flashlight, but everything was deathly still. Back inside, I tried a different tactic. Dimmed the lobby lights to a low glow so I could see more clearly if someone slipped in. I sat behind the desk, listening to every small sound. The tick of the wall clock, the fridge's low hum, the soft creak of the building. Each noise seemed magnified by the silence. I checked the security cameras on the computer. 4 feeds. 1 for the lobby, 1 for the hallway, 2 for the parking lot. But all showed empty space. 15 minutes passed. 20. My eyes began to droop from the tension. I thought the prankster had given up, that maybe the whole thing was my exhausted imagination. And just as I started to relax, nearly nodding off, it happened again. The bell rang, but this time, I saw exactly what pressed it. A pale hand, the skin almost waxy, with long fingers and filthy nails, reached up from beneath the counter, from the narrow gap between the floor and the wooden countertop, and jammed the bell button right in front of me. The ting rang out sharp and clear, and the hand shot back down in an instant. I bolted from my chair so fast it toppled with a crash and sprinted down the hall into the staff room. I slammed the door, threw the bolt, and stood there in the dark, chest heaving, heart pounding like a drum. My mind spun. How could anyone be under the counter? The space beneath was cramped, full of wires and boxes of paperwork. But if someone squeezed themselves in, crouched low and patient, they could have hidden there unnoticed, maybe since the start of my shift, or slipped in while I was in the back. That meant whoever it was had been crouched right beneath my feet, only a few steps away, listening to every move I made, waiting for the perfect moment to act. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped my phone as I called 911. In a hushed, urgent voice, I explained, "Someone's broken into the lodge. He's hiding in the lobby." I just saw his hand come out from under the counter. The dispatcher, a woman with a calm voice, asked for details and told me to stay locked in the room. Officers were on the way. While I waited, I forced myself to look at the break room's computer screen, the one tied to the security cameras. On the lobby feed, I saw the chair I'd knocked over in my panic and the empty counter. But then, at the edge of the frame, there was movement. A head slowly rising from behind the desk, cautious, deliberate. I couldn't make out much, just matted hair and a glint of eyes under the dim lights, staring straight at the camera as though it knew I was watching. I backed away from the screen, afraid it might step right out of it. A moment later, the head disappeared, and I watched him crawl out from his hiding place, on hands and knees, moving like an animal. He wore a hooded jacket pulled low, tall but hunched, and he rose slowly to his full height. He turned his head, scanning the lobby as if looking for me. Then he began pacing, stopping at the glass door to peer outside before turning toward the hallway leading to the staff room. I pressed my back against the door, hearing the heavy footsteps come closer. The knob rattled, just once, very slowly, like a test, and then went still. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, but my throat locked up. All I could whisper was, "He's right outside the door." The minutes dragged, feeling like hours, until at last the footsteps moved away. I darted back to the screen. He was in the lobby again, pacing as though nothing had happened. At one point, he stopped at the brochure rack, flicking through papers almost mockingly, as if killing time while he waited. Every second felt heavy. I prayed the police would get there fast. Finally, on the parking lot camera, I saw flashing blue and red lights. 2 patrol cars arriving. He must have noticed too, because suddenly he bolted off the lobby camera. A second later, I heard the front door slam. When the officers swept the building, they found a large rock near the entrance, likely used to prop the door open without triggering the alarm. But they didn't find him. They searched the lot and the side road, and one officer told me the intruder had probably slipped out as they arrived, maybe vaulting the fence behind the lodge. The police took my statement, reviewed the footage, and confirmed signs of forced entry, including a small folding knife dropped under the counter, its blade sharp and its handle crudely carved with the word Lucas. They promised to increase patrols around the area, but didn't catch him. From that night on, every time I heard the bell ring during a shift, even for a real guest, I thought of that pale hand calmly pressing the button. I quit Starlight Lodge soon after, but the memory of that intruder still haunts me. How long he had been under the counter, listening, waiting for me to slip.